Hello everyone. Good afternoon. Since enggak, hello, itunya udah nyala belum?
Hello.
Yeah, hello everyone. Actually, Kak Diki from Molo and our Molo participant is unfortunately Mbak Mia Siskawati, our resource person for today's session, is not here. I think we still need wait a little bit for Mbak Mia. Hello Alvina, we can start the session right now.
Okay. Hello everyone. Good afternoon and welcome for all the participants here. Let me introduce myself. My name is Alvina. I am a part of Relawan for Life, a urban-based youth organization in Bogor, West Java, and I am currently one of the participants in this regional meeting event. So regional meeting itself is a closing event of the BBI initiatives with the aims to bring together youth from three different communities in Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, Molo, and Dumagat Remontado to facilitate sharing of the learnings gained from the BBI project. Second objective of the regional meeting is to strengthen the understanding of indigenous youth about the concept of indigeneity in today's increasingly modern world. And the third objective is to increase their capacity to use any kind of information and communication to strengthen their indigenous values and tradition. Today I will open the session, which is titled Online Capacity Building, Reconnecting Youth and the Concept of Indigeneity. This session aims to increase the knowledge and awareness of the indigenous people's youth on the concept of indigeneity and what does it mean to be indigenous. The second objective of the session is to discuss why it is important for the indigenous people youth to maintain their indigeneity. And the last objective is to discuss what kind of support or involvement for the public needed to strengthen the indigenous people's struggles. Uh, so, our moderator for the session is Miss Mardatila. She was the executive director from 2016 until 2021 of the RMI. So I invite you, Miss Madatila, to moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvina. Uh, Thanks, everyone. Good day to everyone in Molo, in Dumaga Tremutando communities, and also in Kasepuhan Pasiteri. Selamat siang semuanya. Allow me to speak in in English, um, because then it will be much easier for all of the uh, interpreter to interpret to bahasa Indonesia and also to Tagalog um, for this session. Um, so yeah, I'm so happy to be asked as moderator of this session, because yeah, I personally have been so excited with the BBI journey, being and becoming indigenous project journey since 2020, early 2020, uh, with three youth indigenous communities in the Philippines and also in Indonesia. I'm sorry I can't open my video because my internet connection is not that stable, but I will try once in a while to also to interact with the video on. So yeah, despite all of the obstacles that we had during the project, such as the pandemic, the big ones, and government regulations that restricts like the community's activities, that is also one of the biggest challenge. And natural disaster, we knew that our friends in the Philippines had this typhoon, um, flooding and etc. Um, Also, the existing development projects that are carried out by the government. So yeah, the project it is actually the proof that young people are part of the community, are not living in empty space, that they are affected, influenced, and engaged with everything that happened around them. Yeah, unfortunately, there are not so many opportunities given for young people to speak out for themselves, so that raising opinions, reflecting on their situations, are not part of the youth cultures, especially the ones living in rural areas, such as the ones in our friends in three indigenous peoples community. So although there are some youth platforms exist or facilitated by the government, if any, however, it is more on practical level, such as sports, for example, or other more hands-on activities. But it is very rarely that young people are facilitated to discuss more on conceptual topics, conceptual basis that affect their lives. So that is why we organize this session, because all of the three communities have been learning for the last 10 months, especially on how to understand or perceive their indigeneity, or maybe they are not also, you are not also really aware that am I part of the indigenous peoples, or what makes us become being indigenous, and what does it mean? So we have Ibu Mia Siskawati, Miss Mia Siskawati. We call her Mbak Mia. We usually call her Mbak Mia or Sister Mia, Big Sister Mia. Um, she was the founder of RMI, and she has been working a lot with the indigenous peoples, especially also with the local communities living around and inside the forest area. That was probably one of the first work that she does. And then she is now the head of gender studies in University of Indonesia. So she has been working very thoroughly on gender issues, gender equity issues, and social inclusion as well. So that's why she understands a lot with these young people topics. Um, yeah, she will maybe lead us to discuss further and maybe some reflections from the 10 months works that we organize in this Being and Becoming Indigenous project. Probably also more than 10 months. I mean, before this project, some of us have also been working on the how is it, how it's called, revitalizing the knowledge of young people, reconnecting them to their living space. So yeah, without further ado, so I invite Ibu Mia to start the session to enrich our knowledge and reflections on what it is being Indigenous youth. The floor is yours, Mbak Mia.
All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Selamat siang. As Stella mentioned, my name is Mia. Please call me Mbak Mia, or for friends from the Philippines, you could call me Ate Mia. Yeah, Ate means big sister. Sister. Okay, thank you very much, Wahyu, Tila, Supri, and friends from RMI to invite me to have discussion with you. Yeah, this is very interesting event. I think this is a very important process. So friends from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, from Molo of Timor Island, is Nusa Tenggara. I have been staying in Molo for 2 weeks in 2008, and friends from Dumogat, Remontando, Tanay, the Philippines, and also friends from Ava, Pakisama, Lakawat Kujawas, and of course, friends from Aremaya. So I'm preparing my slides, and I will have I will invite all of you to also have interactive discussion. So you don't need to wait until I finish my presentation to have discussion. You could always raise your hand during my presentation so that I could stop and we could have discussion. And also like during the presentation, also I will probably after several slides, I will stop and you could also raise any questions if you would like. All right, so this is, please bear with me, the computer is quite slow, yeah. All right. The host, please allow me to be able to share screen. I think the host need to click allow multiple participants to share screen. Is the host is RMI Secretariat? Tila or Supri? Tila or Supri or friends from RMI?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Could you please give give me the access to share the screen? Oh, there's Mbak Butet here. Hi, Mbak Butet.
Halo Kak,
Yeah.
sambil
sambil ngurus-urus anak, jadi aku matiin video sekali-sekali ya.
Okay. Yeah. Still, Tila and friends at RMI. Still, the host is still disabled participant to share screen. Yeah.
I think, Wayu, you're already the host.
Wayu, can you help? Okay, done, Bamia.
Done? Okay.
You're the host now. You can share. Co-host. Yeah.
All right.
It's me, Maylene.
Okay. All right. Okay, I hope all of you could see my screen.
Yes.
Right.
It's not. Wait. Well, it is still white, but it's. I think it's coming. Yes. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Again, thanks for friends and colleagues who participate in the event. This is a very important event, and I'd like to share the topic of reconnecting youth with the concept of indigeneity and indigenous knowledge. And this is exciting. Like Tila mentioned that I'm one of the founders of RMI. I remember I was still youth when we've established RMI. I was 23 at the time. Okay, so I'd like to start with the term indigenous people. So when we discuss about indigeneity, of course, we will always start with the term indigenous peoples. This term actually relatively new, but not the people. The people, of course, indigenous peoples have been really like living on Earth for a very long time. But the term, yeah. So the term indigenous peoples emerged in the 1970s out of especially the struggles primarily in the Latin America as well as in the North America, the United States, Canada. So that's the beginning of the term that officially used. And so it is the term that also internalized the experience, the issues, and the struggles of some of the world's colonized peoples. So the struggles of indigenous peoples from one, of course, country to another country, from one region to another region will be different. And all of you already share about, I mean, especially all of you from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, from Molo, from Dumogat, Remontado, you have shared. And I have actually watched the YouTube records of your conversation as well as the virtual tours to each of your place. So the terms, if you see the people in English, there's the additional S behind the people, so the peoples. The final S in indigenous peoples has been argued for quite vigorously by indigenous activists because of the right of peoples to self-determination. So it's not only people or orang-orang dalam satu komunitas, but also could be like the communities. It is also used as a way of recognizing that there are real the differences between different indigenous peoples. Take, for example, your experience, like Kaspuan Pasir Ari, Molo, Dumogat, Remontado, you have, of course, like a different experience, different struggles, and also different ways to respond to all the struggles. And for example, for Kasapuhan, in Kasapuhan, the Kasapuhan Pasir Ri, you might also have a bit different experience with other Kasapuhan, although you're very connected and quite close. You share similar language, but you might have a little bit different experience. So for the case of Indonesia, the term indigenous communities or masyarakat adat actually coined officially in 1993. Indonesia was still under the authoritarian regime at that time. So from 1993, the term discussed, and finally, when the indigenous people of Indonesia had first Congress in Jakarta in 1999, this is right away, a year after the authoritarian regime collapsed. So that Congress, the first National Congress of the Indigenous Peoples of Indonesia, produced a working definition for indigenous community as community that inhabit an ancestral domain from generation to generation, have sovereignty over their land and natural resources, of which and also regulated by customary law and institutions, maintaining the people's sustainability. So that's the terminology for indigenous communities or masyarakat adat. So the emphasis is on the ancestral domain, then sovereignty over the land and natural resources, and also customary law. There has been recent that almost similar in the context of Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and some other countries where the indigenous peoples movement began in the 90s. And actually, Indonesia learned a lot from the Philippines. Is the situation where the ancestral domain or the customary territory are claimed by the state and other parties as part of the either state lands or the public land controlled and managed by, say, private companies who receive licenses from the government or state-owned companies who also manage that resources. So there has been agrarian conflict because of the the claim that the ancestral domain of the indigenous peoples are part of the either state forest area or other state lands. And I think for the case of in Indonesia, Philippines, as well as other countries in Southeast Asia, similar. Yeah? So indigenous peoples in these countries, in Southeast Asian countries, have been really struggling to face either the extractive industries like mining, logging, industrial plantation like oil palm plantation, or establishment of dam effort that people of Dumagat Remontado have to face the establishment of a big dam, or for the case of Kapusapuhan Pasiruri, the people have to face the situation where the ancestral domain or customary community have been established as national park. And from I think for people of Molo, then they have to face the mining company. In this case, it's the stone mining company. So the rights of indigenous people, the struggles for the recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples as well as the protection have been started actually since the late actually started in the international events like in the late 50s, slowly, not too strong, in the 60s and the 70s, 80s and early 90s, very strong, the indigenous peoples movement. So in 2007, after 20 years of negotiation, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted as a non-binding statement that recognizes indigenous rights to self-determination, education, institutions, political and economic development, as well as the right to participate in the life of the state. That's the content of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This is a non-binding statement, but Indonesia, I know that also the Philippines have signed this United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. By confirming the rights of indigenous peoples, that UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples strengthened a concept of what's so-called rights-based development agenda. So the agenda for development that is really paying so much attention on the human rights. In this case, it's human rights of the indigenous peoples and also additional rights of the indigenous peoples, and encourages better understanding of traditional land tenure and the need to recognize its validity for women and other vulnerable or marginalized groups in the face of climate change and shifting population dynamics. And shifting population dynamics, this is not only that, many members of indigenous communities, they prefer to move to the cities or nearby cities. It's not just about preference, but certain contexts, the indigenous communities receive so much threats as well as so much problems because of the agrarian conflicts, and gradually they decided to move to other areas. And for the case of Indonesia, during the authoritarian regime in the especially during 1970s to the early 1990s, there was like the efforts, this is state efforts to move the indigenous communities from their ancestral or customary areas to the transmigration areas in other islands, so that their ancestral domain or customary territory could be used for either the extractive industries like logging, industrial plantation, or mining, or for some other purposes. That's the about the indigenous, the rights of indigenous peoples. And I think for the youth from the three communities that have joined this event, there's still more homework to really talk about the indigenous youth, because like it is important. Yeah, the indigenous youth will become the generation that will continue. Yeah, to continue. For example, continue to in the context of the indigenous knowledge, the indigenous youth will continue to maintain, to nurture, and also to practice. And I believe it will also then develop the knowledge, because knowledge is never static. Knowledge is always dynamic. Okay, that's about the indigenous people. Then I'll move to the concept of indigeneity. Okay, so if the term indigenous peoples refers to the peoples that live from one generation to another generations in the ancestral domain and have really close connection with the land and nature. So that's the indigenous peoples. Then there's a concept of indigeneity. This is also the concept is actually developed during the period where the indigenous peoples movement have become the attention, receiving also attention from academicians, academic institution, then academicians and other also scholar activists. So the term indigeneity is actually the concept that we could use as an entry point for analysis of the diverse subjects and institutions who represent themselves or who label others as holding an indigenous quality. So if we talk about concept indigeneity, this is the concept. For example, we are now using this concept. So people, youth, especially from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, from Molo, and from Dumogat Remontado are diverse subjects, yeah, and also are from diverse communities. 3 different communities in this case, and indigeneity also sometimes used as an analytical concept. And as an analytical concept, indigeneity attends to the social, cultural, economic, political, institutional, and epistemic processes through which the meaning of being indigenous in a particular time and place is constructed. This is the key. So, like the title of this program, yeah, being and becoming indigenous youth. So using the concept of indigeneity, each of you from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, from Molo, from Dumogat Remontado could articulate yourself. It's like what's the meaning of you being indigenous youth from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri and from Molo or from Dumogat Remontado. And so constructed is like because you will also construct, so you will develop your understanding as indigenous youth, being indigenous youth in your own context, yeah, in your own text. And this is why like this program is very important, because then in certain contexts, the indigenous youth might not yet have a full understanding, yeah, about their struggles of their communities, or they understand but they have not been really like fully involved in the discussion with the elders or with the leaders of their indigenous community. So then indigeneity is a positioning, a relational reading, and a producing of difference and subjectivity on or in the body politic that always embedded in power differentials at multiple scales. So like, for example, for the case of Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, when you are a member of the Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, especially the youth, you will also face the power relation, yeah, not only within your own family and community, but also with other local communities next to you, and then also people of Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, you must also face the state in this context is the national park, as well as other parties, and this is also for the case of Molo and Dumogat Remontado. So indigeneity also functions as a style and manner of representing the outcomes of specific historical and geographical processes as facts, yes, and then also trying to naturalizing the asymmetries of power. So the asymmetries of power is power, power relation, the imbalance, and this is because of the very long process of power relations, yeah, and in the case of Indonesia and Philippines also began even like not only during the colonial era, but also even before colonial era, in the feudal era, where probably certain communities might have more power other than the nearby communities. Yeah. And also, I think the colonialism play also a very critical role. Yeah. Okay. Indigeneity is also produced by particular people and institutions at particular times in power-drenched ways. So again, this is like in the process of especially the youth from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, from Molo and Dumogat Remontado, each of you, and then also collectively within the youth of your own community will also articulate like what's the meaning of becoming the being and becoming the indigenous youth in your each community. The question then, what is actually the issues or problems faced by the indigenous peoples, and in this case, by the indigenous youth in articulating like the experience of being and becoming indigenous youth. I would like to start from the issues of the customary territory, the ancestral domain, or in bahasa Indonesia is wilayah adat. The customary territory, ancestral domain, or wilayah adat is the living space for indigenous peoples. And the living space for indigenous peoples includes the landscape and various sociocultural, spiritual, economic, and political components. And the landscapes and all components it actually represent the coexistence of the socio-cultural, economic, political relations, and those relations consist at least four main elements in the humans, the other living things like plants, animals, also the abiotic environment element, and also inanimate objects, as well as socio-cultural and spiritual elements. This is the ancestral domain or customary territory of, this is one of the Kasepuhan, but not Kasepuhan Pasir Eri. Actually, I've never been to Kasepuhan Pasir Eri. This is the customary territory of Kasepuhan Cipta Mulya. Yeah. So, so wilayah adat or the customary territory is not only the land, but also space, yeah, because in that living space, actually there are like human and other living things, and then abiotic elements like soil, the water, the air, as well as social cultural elements. So human actors in customary territories or ancestral domains include women and men of different ages and generations. That includes the youth, as well as various other social groups, including marginalized groups. And those individuals interact with each other at the individual, nuclear, family, extended family, community, and broader levels of society. Women and men of indigenous peoples are important actors in managing indigenous knowledge and practices. And youth will also become, I think, nowadays, should become like important actors in managing indigenous knowledge and practices. Customary territory is also an arena of social relations and power relations. Yeah, the social relation and power relations will be based on gender, will be based on class, on age, generations, marital status, etc. So, in other words, when we are talking about customary territory, this is not only the space where, say, villages or the place where the communities live, yeah, indigenous communities live, but customary territory also includes the landscape as an arena of social relations and power relations. Yeah. Within customary territory, indigenous youth are very important actors, yeah, because they, of course, I've already listened to the exchanging of especially the two communities, Kasepuhan Pasir Eri and Dumogat Remontado, of the events, I think on the Tuesday, on Tuesday, and each of you already share, how's your understanding as well as your knowledge about the traditions, about the rituals. So this is the preview feature, Indigenous Youth in Kasepur Cipta Mulia. And these are the youth from Sungai Utik, West Kalimantan. This is interesting. So I'd like to share that at least the indigenous youth that I have met, so especially those who still live in their ancestral domain or customary territory or masyarakat adat, they're actually many of them they still actually learn about the indigenous knowledge from their parents as well as from the elders. And for example, these four girls, they live in Sungai Utik in West Kalimantan, so they're really good in the knowledge about medicinal plants as well as about the other type of plants in the forest. So they still learn, and they still actually they say that they still also somehow help their mothers and elders to also harvest certain plants, especially medicinal plants. At the same time, although they like still maintain the way their communities practices, and also experience the life using the indigenous knowledge, but at the same time, actually, they also become the individuals that also use the components in the so-called modern life. So they have cell phones, and I believe that all the youth attending this event, youth from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, Molo, and Dumogat Remontado, you guys have cell phones, the cell phones. So in the 90s, probably there's also a discussion that okay, becoming indigenous should mean like you must be like a pure, authentic individuals that still follow the way of life of your ancestors. But actually, indigenous peoples, indigenous communities, including indigenous youth, are really like a dynamic individuals, and in some cases, I think many cases, the indigenous youth you still somehow like probably like utilize the technologies as well as other elements that is part of the modernity, but at the same time you still like, and I hope you still as you still like maintain really your understanding, and also you still try to preserve by practicing the indigenous knowledge. The other thing that is important in the customary territory or ancestral domain is the socio-cultural spiritual element. And that element has sub-elements. So the language system, the religious system and spirituality, the kinship system and social organization, the knowledge system, and I will talk more about this, and the technological system, the economic system, tenure system, art, that's part of the socio-cultural spiritual element in the customary territory or ancestral domain. And each sub-elements actually connect to each other. So knowledge system includes human knowledge about various things that are used and managed in his or her life, and that's part like I think the life of the indigenous community in Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, Molo, and Dumogat Remontado. So each community always has a collection of knowledge about the various components or elements in the living space, namely humans, other living things, or elements of the abiotic environment and environment. objects as well as socio-cultural spiritual elements. So, for example, farming communities have a traditional agricultural calendar. It becomes a farm reference to start cultivating the land, when planting, and when to harvest their agricultural products. And so I hope the indigenous youth will also be interested to continue learning about the traditional agricultural calendar in each community, especially during this time because we have been facing problems with the climate change. So the traditional agricultural calendar might have to be changed, and you indigenous youth could also help their parents as well as their elders in managing the traditional agricultural calendar. So fishing communities also develop knowledge of the sea and the weather conditions to determine the best time to catch fish or other marine resources in the sea. And knowledge about condition of the sea is obtained through the science or the location of the star clusters in the sky. Talking about indigenous knowledge, this is really important to note that through historical experience and intensive interaction with environmental components of various ecological settings, indigenous peoples and local communities have developed excellent environmental knowledge systems that are socially and culturally specific. 2 days ago, you guys already exchanged information about, for example, how the Kasapuhan Pasir Arih people manage the paddy, especially the local variety of paddy, what kind of rituals, and then also what's the meaning of the barn, or in traditional they call it loit, the place to put the paddy after harvested. And so that knowledge probably for you who live in the indigenous communities, because it is part of your life, and you just probably observe from the parents or from the elders, you might not think that's important, but actually it is very important, because many researchers have proved that have found out that indigenous peoples and local communities have developed excellent actually environmental knowledge systems that are socially and culturally specific. So usually later, if you have opportunity to have readings and probably have more discussion, usually the terms that commonly used in the literature include traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous local knowledge, traditional knowledge, or traditional forest knowledge, or indigenous local ecological knowledge, or local ecological knowledge. So that's, but it's the same. It is talking about actually indigenous or local knowledge. That's why, despite those variations in terminology, there has been general consensus that such knowledge system have evolved and retained in dynamic ways by indigenous and local communities. So indigenous local knowledge refers to the body of knowledge, beliefs, traditions, practices, institutions, and worldviews developed by indigenous, peasant, and local communities in interaction with their physical environment, as well as social, cultural, economic, political condition across period of time. Indigenous local knowledge is strongly influenced by gender dimension and other socio-cultural, economic, political dimension. What does it mean? It means certain indigenous local knowledge, mostly held by the elder women, for example, or by the women who occupies a specific function, like as a traditional midwife, or as traditional healer, or as other function. I mean, having other function for the community. So contribution of indigenous local knowledge is very important for ecosystem preservation, because indigenous communities who maintain tight links to ecosystem dynamics have developed indigenous local knowledge, practices, and institutions to secure their livelihood. Again, for the indigenous youth, you might think that's the how we live, and that's how actually we manage resources. But again, actually, the indigenous local knowledge of each indigenous community is really important. And for not only for the ecological resources, but also, of course, for the people themselves. So ILK, or indigenous local knowledge, can strengthen the capacity of human societies to deal with disturbances and to maintain ecosystem services under conditions of uncertainty and change. Indigenous local knowledge system are constantly evolving and not static. It's like always evolve, always develop. Talking about indigenous local knowledge, although that knowledge will be very specific from each community to other community, at the international level, at the United Nations level, there has been formal recognition of indigenous local knowledge. Article 8J of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity explicitly states the need to respect, preserve, and maintain knowledge practices of local and indigenous communities related to biological diversity. What is biological diversity? Is the diversity of the living things, animal, plants, and other living things, from the diversity of the gene, or kayak keanekaragaman genetik in bahasa Indonesia, to the diversity of species, diversity of the ecosystem. So talking about the rice, for example, for Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, I believe people of Kasepuhan Pasir Eri still maintain like a lot of different varieties of paddy. It's a local varieties of the paddy, which is completely different with the hybrid varieties of paddy produced by the industry or the seed industries. And the knowledge to maintain the local varieties of paddy, of local varieties of rice, is really part of the indigenous knowledge that recognized by the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. Yeah. So again, this is the picture of Kasepuhan. This is Kasepuhan Sirna Resmi. So for maybe indigenous youth in Kasepuhan Sirna Resmi or Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, you might feel like, oh yeah, that's how we actually the way of our life. But the indigenous local knowledge in especially for this case is like in taking care of the local varieties of paddy, which is completely different with the hybrid varieties of paddy or rice produced by seed industries, is actually really the way to protect the culture, the spirituality too, then the indigenous economy, as well as, of course, the environment. Yeah. So the small houses on your right, that's the barn, yeah? The rice barn, or in Kasepuhan people call it luit. So youth, again, after talking about, before start discussing about youth and indigenous modernity, I will stop a little bit here. So Tila, I'd like to invite if there's like participants who would like to deliver any questions or comments.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mbak Mia. So I invite, maybe there are some comments or questions. Yeah, from the participants. Maybe something needs to be clarified to the speakers. Please, you can raise your hand and open your mic, or you can put your questions in the chat box. Maybe open your mic and talk will be easier. I think unfortunately the Kasepuhan Pasir Eri community cannot connect.
Oh,
I
okay.
can see
Okay.
them. Anyone from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, also Supri and Ramai's team, I don't think they connect at this moment.
Okay.
So yeah, please, any questions or comments? I was okay. Anyone? I have to swipe because I am using my phone. Swipe right if anyone, maybe friends from Molo and also from the Philippines.
Friend from Molo? It's Bang Vicky Senda, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So if there's not yet a question, I could continue. Tila?
Okay. Yeah. Please, Mamia.
Yeah. So, all right. Yeah. So, maybe before talk about the indigenous youth and modernity, I'd like to be back a little bit on the knowledge. So, the not only the preservation, but actually the adoption and the application of the indigenous local knowledge in each indigenous communities is very crucial, and youth could have a very important role in preserving, maintaining, nurturing, as well as develop actually indigenous local knowledge. And why I emphasize that the role of youth, because it's like I think many indigenous communities now have been facing really threats, from not only in terms of the land, like land grabbing, but also, for example, this is just an example of the practice of the farming, and not that I only think about rice, of course. In terms of the food, we also understand that other indigenous peoples, they also have their own like main food, so could be sago, like 2 days ago you discussed in this forum, sago or corn or other type of potatoes, including sweet potatoes and other kind of food, but the threats is like the threats of from the industries, it's a seed industries, also from other industries that actually part of the what we call the green revolution policy, in the 70s, that start of the green revolution industries policies, I mean, in the world, is like then encourage and in certain locations like enforce farmers to no longer like apply their traditional knowledge, their indigenous local knowledge, their local ecological knowledge in farming. So they change into the hybrid varieties, and for the seed, they depend on the seed industries. They have to buy, and also they have to give input, chemical inputs, like fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and in certain indigenous communities, actually, that also started to reduce the application of the indigenous local knowledge. For the context of, for example, Borneo, especially in this is the case of East Borneo. So because of the arrival of the logging companies, so the farming activity, especially not the wet paddy field, yeah, but the dry paddy field, call it huma, that actually part of the also what we call community-based forest and natural resources management in the community, because when they open the huma in Borneo Island, they will also they will just manage for maximum 5 to 6 years, and then they will move to other area, and the area that previously managed as a dry paddy field would gradually turn into a new forest or secondary forest. So because the area that in the past could be used to open the dry paddy field already like occupied by logging companies or controlled by other companies like industrial plantation, the practices of the traditional farming reduced. The indigenous local knowledge in certain communities also reduced. And that reduction not only contribute to the loss of the local varieties of the plants, but also in the stories also that certain words in their local language is almost gone because the current generation never use that again, because the practice of the traditional farming is reducing and decreasing. So imagine, for example, in other, especially non-indigenous communities, local communities, in the past, luit or the traditional rice barn is part of many Sundanese communities. But again, since the late 60s, 70s, when the Green Revolution policy for agriculture started to be implemented, so the new hybrid variety of rice, after they are harvested, they will be immediately processed. Then they will be put in the bag, certain bag, and many communities then they felt that they did not need any more late or paddy, the rice barn. So it's gone, and it might be possible in certain local communities that have no rice barn anymore. The word late or the word traditional rice barn might not be used anymore. So change the language, the reduction or the decrease of the indigenous local knowledge could also implicate to the loss of the words, and might also influence the dynamics of the language, their local language. Okay, so I will now discuss a bit about the youth and indigenous modernity, because, and this is still linked to the knowledge. Some indigenous youth might have a critical question that they might feel, or some of you, I mean, if Pastor Eri already connected, or maybe friends of Molo or Dumogat Remontado, some of the youth might have the thinking that the indigenous local knowledge is old knowledge, pengetahuan yang jadul, old knowledge, and primitive knowledge or conventional knowledge. But again, actually, nowadays, even the non-indigenous communities, even those living in the like industrial countries, now they are back to the adoption of the indigenous local knowledge because they feel it's more sustainable. So yeah, I like to then discuss about this, because then if the indigenous youth continue to preserve the indigenous local knowledge, doesn't mean that you are just like becoming like a kind of a community that's different with the world. Yeah, so I'd like to discuss a little bit about modernity. So indigenous peoples actually encounter with modernity in certain areas, that encounter not led to the total destructions of indigenous worldviews, knowledge, and practices, and or they replace with the Western modernities. Rather, like all post-colonial societies in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, modern institutions, practices, and logics continue to coexist with indigenous logics. Yeah. I remember when I visited Molo in 2008. At that time, like especially the girls or young girls in Molo, yeah, that they must learn weaving, yeah, weaving as part of the indigenous local knowledge that every girl must have it, and also some other local knowledge. But then at the same time, I think at that time. The smart cell phones already developed, and of course the youth very interested to have it. What is interesting is like the technology also then plays also an interesting role among the youth, so that they could share. So anytime after they finish weaving, they will take picture and they will share to their colleagues, their friends, yeah. And then because the pattern in the weaving is they learn from their mothers, their elders, but then when they exchange, they could also learn each other. And so technology, this could coexist actually with the indigenous logics or indigenous worldviews, knowledge, and practices. But it is important that the indigenous youth still like pay attention, yeah, to indigenous worldviews, knowledge, and practices of their own communities. Otherwise, then the components that sometimes affiliated as components of modernity would then distract, yeah, the indigenous knowledge and practices. So I'd like to share about this is just like to give a kind of story that might hopefully could inspire, especially the youth from Kasipuan, Pasir Eri, Molo, and Dumogat, Remontado. This is about the youth and indigenous knowledge. This is a story of Purun in Central Kalimantan, Central Borneo, Indonesia. Yeah. So Purun is one of the plant in peatland, especially. So the Latin name is Lepironia articulata. This is a typical plant that grow in peatland area that has important functions for people living in peatland area. Yeah. So purun that grows in waterways is also useful for improving water quality during the dry season and absorbing toxic substances in the water. So the large amount of water in the purun is also useful for preventing, overcoming, and minimizing fires in peatlands. Yeah? So it's at a glance you will see it's like a grass. It's just a grass, but it has a special functions for the environment. Yeah? So purun can also be used as an organic fertilizer and biofilter because it can improve water quality and is able to absorb toxic elements. Of course, probably like for each indigenous community, you will have your own certain plants, yeah, and not all plants could be just easy to be planted in other areas. This is just a story. So for participants from Kasipuan, Pasir Eri, Molo, and Dumogat, Remontado, you could then later you could identify certain plants that actually very useful for the environment, but also very important for your communities. So for Purun, actually, women holds knowledge in Purun weaving, yeah, as well as Purun resources management. So not only in the weaving, but also in the resources management. So in harvesting, as well as in trying to manage the area so that young Puruns could start regrow. Yeah. So women weavers of Purun produce varieties of weaving products that have socio-cultural economic benefits. Started usually in the past, actually young women then also learn from their mothers and other women elders in their communities. But then I think based on the stories from the women there, so because of the Purun resources decreased, and why decreased? Because the peatlands, then some of the peatlands claimed as state land, and then the state give licenses to the plantation companies or other extractive companies like mining. Then the area of Purun reduced, and because of that, then the number of the weavers also reduced, and the young generation were not interested to learn weaving because they thought it's like old knowledge and not really producing money. So the economic benefits, their perspective on economic benefits different. But for the women weavers, they feel that they need to continue producing the weave product from woven products from Purun because it could help their family, although it will not produce a lot of money. But the case of one village in Central Kalimantan, the name of the village is Tumbang Nusa. So the youth there, especially the indigenous youth, they're interested to learn more about the potential of the Puruns. And then they found out that actually, if they could do more in terms of the producing the products from Purun, it will be useful for the economic benefits, but also for the environment because of the ecological functions of the Purun. Yeah? So this is actually the weaver is still dominated by the senior women, but then now the younger women, and now also some of the young men started also to learn the weaving process. But the circulation of the products in terms of the marketing and also connecting with potential buyers are done by the youth. Yeah. So and then also the youth group there then also came up with the idea of the processed the Purun as the straw, as ecological straw. So Purun-based products have been developed into green products by youth groups. Indigenous knowledge of Purun weaving and Purun management helped by women could be further utilized to support the restoration of the peatlands. So the close collaboration between the youth group and the women group in that village in Central Kalimantan, using the indigenous local knowledge, could be just used as an example how then being indigenous youth, you could like reconnect again with the indigenous knowledge, and not only just to think about the economic benefit, but moreover, it would then be benefit for the social, cultural, and spiritual and ecological functions. So to close, this is my little story of reconnecting with indigenous local knowledge. Yeah, friends and RM I already know, but I was going to share with especially the young participants from Kasipuhan Pasir Eri, Molo, and Dumogat Remontado. Yeah, so me myself, I'm not only teaching or doing research, but I think I'm learning again to be farmer, especially in the ancestral village of my husband in upland, one area of upland, West Java, yeah, where we also not only manage the paddy field, but also try to explore again the local varieties of rice and other edible foods. So it is interesting that when we try to reconnect with the what so-called the uh, indigenous local knowledge. Many at the beginning, many people in uh, the ancestral village of my husband like did not believe that the local variety of rice could be planted again, because it's gone. It's been gone. I think it's been gone more than 30 years. Yeah. They also did not believe that the ani, the it's called finger shaped knife that used for the husbanding of that local rice could be used. But then we experimented, and also the women of our village still remember how to use that, and it attracts also the young generation. Yeah, and then together we learned that actually this traditional harvesting equipment in Sundanese is called atem, in Javanese is called ani. This is not only just a knife, it has a function also for the selection of the rice. So when we do the harvesting, it's not only just cut everything. What we could do like 3 stages of harvesting that will also be useful for the seed selection for the next planting session. Okay, that is my share. I believe like if the youth, especially indigenous youth from Kasukuan Pasir Eri, Molo, Dumogat, Remontado could also reconnect with the indigenous local knowledge. It would be really like useful, I think, not only for preservation of the like a cultural tradition, social and spiritual components, but also ecological contribution of the indigenous local knowledge. And I believe indigenous youth could really play important role. Yeah, so that's right, Atem. Yeah, so it is interesting in the ancestral village of my husband when we started. So we could not find people who still have Atem, because it's been gone. But then gradually, one by one of our neighbor who still keep it, they said, I still have it. I still have it. It only used as a like part of the ritual of harvest, the first harvest, but that's all, because they no longer plant the local variety of rice. Yeah, that is very tall. But what nowadays they plant as the hybrid variety of rice, which is very short, and you just use the other equipment to harvest that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Tila.
Okay.
I'm
Thank
also
you,
reading Bang Diki Senda.
Mia.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So
any?
yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is it good? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mbak Mia, Atemia in Tagalog. Yeah. So yeah. We have heard like a very conceptual, explanation on what it is actually. There are 3 parts. Maybe I explain a little bit. Explain a little bit for our friends in Kasukuan Pasir Eri who just joined, because they have some issues on their internet connections. So Mbak Mia explained, I think at least the first thing is that what is indigenous peoples, and then what is the indigeneity, and then the indigenous traditional knowledge. That is 3 main parts of the session this afternoon. So in regards with the indigenous peoples, she mentions that it is the at one of the highlight is that we have the S on the terms of indigenous peoples, which is maybe established in 70s, or in 70s, because the global community needs the concept to connect all of these indigenous peoples community, although the indigenous peoples themselves have been there for hundreds of years, right? So why there is S in the indigenous peoples? It is to show that the heterogeneity or the differences between the indigenous peoples from one place to another, like from Molo, from Kasepuhan, from Dumagat Remotando, there are differences. So it is not to say that indigenous peoples are uniform, are the same. And then there is the Bamia also mentioned about the indigeneity. What it is analysis concept. So maybe the academicians use it to analyze communities regarding their politics, culture, etc. But there's also a positioning, yeah, Mbak Mia, yeah.
Yeah,
It's also positioning. So and then it's also a style of manners that is represented as the outcomes of specific historical and geographical processes, and then it is produced by certain people in a given times. And she highlighted also one of the most important thing as being indigenous or indigeneity is the traditional knowledge that I think she mentioned that from the knowledge exchange that has been happening since 2 days ago between the three communities. There are many traditional knowledges there's also as in traditional knowledges that's another struggle that it can coexist with modernity. Bamia showed like the straw made of purun, while the purun management itself is based on traditional knowledge, but then the young people modified it to be straw, while the straw itself is actually something modern. Probably no one drinks with straw hundreds of years ago or decades ago. But then there is this straw, but then using the local knowledge made of ecological what is it materials. So yeah, that's the sum up. But then there are many questions and also comments in the chat box. Just a moment. Yeah. So from the first one is from Ellen from Molo, our friends from Molo. She said that what is very challenging for us in Molo is how to put other young people on board to be engaged in the traditional or cultural activities in Molo, because modernity comes so fast. So and while we don't have enough energy and ways as many as what comes from the outside or modernity. So Mbak Mia, you have been maybe visiting many communities. You're also a lecturer. How do you see the situations?
Okay, so better to respond ya, Tila, one by one ya, one by one ya. Okay, Ellen, thank you very much for that very good question. Yeah, very good question. So not only in Molo, I think many indigenous communities, not all, yeah, because some indigenous communities are still very strong, and the youth is still involved. But many indigenous communities, the young generation feel that they really want to be different with their parents or with their families in the village, and maybe their aspiration is becoming successful individuals by leaving the village. leaving their village and becoming like somebody who probably live in the so-called modern life, and it is because of many factors. And actually, I'd like to mention also, because one factor is, especially during in Indonesia, is called during Orde Baru, or the New Order period. It was an authoritarian regime. So during that period, actually, the indigenous peoples as well as local communities were mostly labeled as uh, suku terasing, as like alienated tribes, or the backward tribes, or the primitive tribes. And that really actually, I think, somehow also internalized uh, to the young generation. That's number one. So many discriminations, many actions that really made the life in the indigenous communities really difficult. Yeah. The second is what I mentioned. This is again, I think this is for the kids, probably in Indonesia and several Southeast Asian countries. Yeah, the starting of the implementation of the agricultural policy. This is a global policy actually that I mentioned in my presentation, namely the Green Revolution, Revolusi Hijau. The Green Revolution. What is a Green Revolution policy? This is policy that force farmers from indigenous communities and local communities to stop practicing their traditional farming using indigenous local knowledge, and they must start practicing the so-called like modern agriculture, modern in the sense using a new hybrid or new kind of seed produced by the seed industries, and they must like put chemical fertilizer, pesticides, and other things. And these Green Revolution policy also influence the mind of many people that rice became number one. So in many indigenous communities in Indonesia, because of that policy, the mind is like, if we eat cassava, sweet potato, umbi-umbian, the taro, or sagu, it's like a backward. People who still consume that as a backward people. And actually, that's the product of that global agricultural policy, somehow triggered by the industries, yeah, the fertilizer industries, the pesticides. But actually, in terms of biodiversity, our food is already diverse since 1,000 years ago. So again, that's also that policy created like poverty, created like struggles for many farming communities. And again, it influenced the youth that no, living in the village is like a lot of struggles. And so again, then the modernity came. Yeah, modernity came. So when the modernity elements came, it seems like, oh, the way of life of my indigenous communities is very backward, very primitive. I feel not good being an indigenous youth because of that. So, but actually, if we learn, and maybe it's good to invite the colleagues from indigenous youth from each of your community to read together, yeah, because actually the indigenous peoples have been developing their own concept of modernity. So, for example, if we learn in Latin America, there's a Machu Picchu. Yeah, there's a kind. It's not a temple. It's part of the high culture, and they have the concept of modernity. Yeah, of course, the modernity now is like because of the colonialism. Many countries, after we declare as a new independently country, then we still in the situation where the colonized countries became more industrialized. Then they produced a lot of things that they are selling to our countries, and then the target are mainly youth, of course, because youth will become the generation that will consume that for a long time. So again, that's really a challenge. Yeah. So not only in Molo, but also in many other communities. So it is good that the indigenous youth from each community then could be facilitated to have a critical discussion. Yeah, what's the meaning of being and becoming, and how is actually being indigenous youth, how to respond the modernity, and because we cannot avoid, but we could coexist, even we could utilize, the elements of modernity to really support the recognition, the protection of the indigenous rights, as well as the improvement of the quality of life of indigenous communities. Yeah. That's my response to Helen. Yeah. Okay, Tila.
Okay. Thank you, Mbak Mia. There are also another
From
comment.
Bapak Fon.
Yeah, Bapak Fon, also
Bapak
from
Fon?
Molo.
Molo.
He mentioned that
Yeah.
it's a comment that there are discriminative laws from the government, so that the community is feeling very afraid that they will be punished or but then if they keep on silent, that they will lost the land. That's from Bapak Fun, and also I will just also read, maybe you can react to that later on. So Mama Fun asked, how is the progress of the progress of the masyarakat adat law or indigenous peoples bill in Indonesia? And at least one more, she mentioned that they have been collecting the local seeds, experimenting on local foods, but then the government has no policy to support the local richness, the local biodiversity. Instead, they import food from even different countries. So this is very, very big homework for us as indigenous communities. Please,
thank you, Bapak Fun, Mama Fun, and Alice. So I think I'll respond together. All those three questions. So especially because during the New Order regime, or the Baru, 32 years, the government really suppressed the indigenous communities. So at that time, many government policies actually did not recognize the existence of the indigenous communities. That's why when Bapak Pun mentioned that state actors until now, although the policy changed already, state actors are still sometimes discriminate. But then I think I'd like to suggest that not only in Molo, for each indigenous community, then the discussion process continues by also understanding about the policy changes, because now there are some policies that actually could be used as the policy reference for advocacy, for talking to the government, for the negotiation with the government. But then again, although we have some policies that could be used as a reference for the advocacy, for the purpose of recognition and protection of the indigenous rights, we still have a big homework, because the draft bill on the recognition and protection of the rights of indigenous people are still in the process. So very long process. It's been since the National Alliance of Indigenous Peoples of Archipelago, AMAN, submitted to the National Legislative in 2012. finally this year, the draft bill on the indigenous rights or rancangan undang-undang masyarakat adat finally this year is part of the legislative process. So hopefully the process will be smooth, and we will soon have the bill or the law on the protection of the rights of indigenous peoples. Yeah. So that law should become the basis of for example, not only the political, social, economic, and cultural rights, but also should be used as a reference for the protection of indigenous knowledge too. Yeah. So, and for at least, yeah, actually many indigenous communities and as well as other local communities, or someone like me and my husband who really want to return to our ancestral village, and then adopting again, relearning again about the ancestral indigenous knowledge. It is as a challenge. Yes, it is a challenge because, and when you mention about government, especially about the import, I'd like to add that actually in terms of the food issues, especially importing food issues. So the problem is not only the policy that still allow the importing of the food from outside the country, but also the certain actors, yeah, both state actors or non-state actors. Non-state actors could be from the business community or from the capital holder, pemegang modal, that really for them is like importing food will make them having a big benefit because they could get the benefit from selling that imported food. So it's in certain contexts, the policy might already actually be used, could be used for the protection, but then at the same time, there's some actors, yeah, both state actors and non-state actors that still would like to get benefit by not supporting the efforts to develop the local food, the local variety of food plants, and any efforts to really develop the production of the food used using the local indigenous knowledge. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mamia. Are there any comments or questions from maybe from the Philippines, from friends in Dumaga Tremontando communities? Or also other participants that attending this session, you can also comment or ask.
I'd like
or
to,
from Kasepuhan.
yeah,
Yes, Mamia.
I'd like to ask maybe representative, maybe one each from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri, then from Molo, and then from Dumogat Remontando, what does it mean for you as indigenous youth in terms of like learning the local knowledge, and maybe not yet at the efforts to maintain or nurture or to develop local knowledge. So I'd like to hear that.
Okay, anyone would like to start?
From, either from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri or Molo or Drumogat Remontado.
Okay, who wants to go first?
I think
What is it
mhm.
being?
Yeah, Friends from Molo, written by Erlis. I think they have been active to start collecting the local seed, also experimenting with the local food, and that's actually an example
Yeah.
of nurturing, maintaining of the indigenous local knowledge. Yeah. So from the Philippines, you have any share?
Let's wait, Mbak Mia.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Oh yeah, because it's like
Yes.
it's a meeting. Yeah, they have to
Yeah.
ask. They have to ask. Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
repeat the question. Okay. Friends from Dumogat Remontado, if you could share, like maybe a story or experience as indigenous youth, the story or experience in order to learn again. So I call it relearning about the indigenous local knowledge in your own community. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And that will be Tila, because I know time is approaching, but that will be like
Yeah.
maybe the last section of our discussion.
Yes. Maybe also friends from other location, from Molo, from Kasepuan Pasir Eri can also, if
Or type.
anything,
Yeah.
or type. Okay, someone is sitting at the front of the computer. I don't know, friends from Molo mentioned that they are having some issues as well in there, because suddenly it is rain heavily, so they lost the connections at times. They say that they couldn't hear, they are joining here, but they couldn't hear the discussion. So if they are connected again.
Pasir Eri participant also are still discussing the answer. So
Yes, yeah.
Halo.
Yes.
Ya, Bang Diki.
Kak Supri dan Kak Tila, ini ada teman-teman dari Molo yang mau menjawab.
Okay, please.
Indi, silakan Indi. Sini satu ini nanti geser desu. Kami internetnya agak parah, jadi ini kalau geser sedikit kami akan.
Paham.
Iya, nggak apa-apa.
Saya pernah 2 minggu di sana.
Baik, perkenalkan saya Indi. Saya akan menjawab pertanyaan.
Ya, Indi. Ya, Adik Indi.
Jadi, kenapa pemuda di Molo penting untuk mempelajari soal adat istiadat? Karena yang pertama, kalau kita tidak tahu mengenai adat istiadat kita sendiri, bagaimana kita bisa mengajak sesama kita untuk bersama-sama dengan kita untuk melestarikan adat istiadat dan kebudayaan yang ada. Dan yang berikut, melihat dari keadaan yang sekarang, pemuda harus punya banyak peran untuk mengajak sesama agar kita bisa bersama menjaga apa yang sudah ada, menjaga alam dan lingkungan kita, agar jika suatu saat nanti ada pemerintah atau ada dari pihak-pihak luar yang datang untuk merebut itu, kita sudah punya kekuatan untuk mempertahankan apa yang menjadi hak milik kita. Baik, terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Indi.
Mantap, Indi.
Terima kasih, Nona Indi. Thank you. Is there anybody translate for the Philippines? Sila, please.
Wahyu, is it already translated to English or Do you need to translate it or? Okay, it's already translated
Right.
to English.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Wahyu. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. That.
Okay, from Ava or Pasir Eri?
Tila, are you asking for our answer to the question of Mia?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yes.
we were discussing, so I wasn't listening fully. So who wants to share, Princess? Yung sinabi mo kanina.
Pasir Eri duluan.
Princess.
Udah ready.
I think Ava is already
Okay,
ready.
we can go first.
Oh, okay. All right then. Pasir Eri,
Ya,
please.
silakan. Please.
Baik, saya Suhendra dan teman saya Susi dari Kesatuan Pasir Eri. Sedikit akan menjelaskan pentingnya bagi pemuda untuk mengetahui tentang kasapuhan khususnya. Nah, salah satu pentingnya menurut saya karena memang generasi muda yang sangat harus mengetahui tentang kesepuhan itu sendiri, karena jika tidak mengetahui maka terputuslah sudah langkah-langkah para kesepuhan, para leluhur juga, sehingga nantinya kesepuhan yang ada di pasir ini tidak berkembang karena tadi anak-anak muda atau anak-anak remajanya tidak belajar atau tidak mengetahui tentang kesepuhan itu sendiri.
Susi, mangga kalau mau ditambah.
Pada ditambah, sok mangga.
Mangga teh.
Pemuda perempuan mungkin.
Ya, ini sebagai pemuda perempuannya nih.
Mohon.
Baiklah, saya akan menjawab kenapa pemuda butuh pengetahuan adat atau mempelajarinya, karena kita sebagai generasi penerus harus belajar itu. Kalau tidak, ya nanti sama yang dikatakan oleh Kak Ella, nanti akan terpotong gitu, dan kita tidak bisa memberikan apa-apa kepada anak cucu kita nanti, dan nanti bisa terhapus begitu saja gitu kalau tidak mempelajarinya karena tidak dipelajari oleh kita sendiri. Terus selain itu pengetahuan penting ini itu ketika misalkan ada seseorang yang bertanya sama kita tahu jawabannya, bukan kita hanya anak adat tapi kita tidak tahu apa-apa. Jadi untuk memberi pengetahuan juga kepada orang-orang yang orang-orang asing yang tidak tahu kasepuhan.
Iya. Atur nuhun teh Susi sama Kang Suhandi ya, Suhendi.
Suhendra.
Oh, Suhendra, maaf, Suhendra. Kang Suhendra. Iya.
Terima kasih, thank you. Friend from Kasepuhan Pasir Eri. Now, they mentioned it is to make sure that the knowledge is not terminate. Yeah. So now to our friends in the Philippines, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Tela. So we talked about how the IP youth in Dumagat Remontado are able to reconnect or relearn some of their traditional knowledge and practices. So here's Ses.
Nangyayari lang po yun kapag po sa school nagkakaroon po ng IP month. So, ang nangyayari, nagbibigay yung school ng isang programa para sa mga dumagat.
Okay, so what she said was that in their schools, in the school system, they celebrate IP month. So during the IP month, they're able to show some of the traditional practices like cooking traditional food. What else?
Tsaka po yung nagkakaroon ng paligsahan sa kasuotan saka yung mga talent ng mga katulad.
And then there are competitions on traditional clothing or traditional costumes and the talents of traditional talents or performances of the IP youth. So at least here in the Philippines, we have already made efforts in integrating the recognition of IP culture within the curriculum and also the extracurricular activities and so on. So additional, Richard?
Right.
Sasabihin ka? May dadagdag ka?
Saka gumagawa rin sila ng bahay. Yung kung paano ginagawa nung mga dumagat yung bahay saka sa nila tinatapat.
Okay, and then they also show how the traditional houses of Dumagat Remontado are being built so that the young school children, IP school children becomes familiar with how traditional houses are being built. And then their IP leader, Kuya Nato would like to add. Kuya Nato?
Wala na ba sa kanila niya? Talaga pa yung ikakaw. Muli pong magbabalik at po sa mga katanungan ninyo ay akin pong sasagutin. Sa totoo lang po yung aming tradisyon at saka yung mga gawain ng aming mga ninuno ng tribo ay patuloy pa rin po namin ginagawa. At doon po naman sa pag-aaral ng aming salita ay sa ngayon naman po ay meron na rin kami na paaralan ng aming tradisyon at saka ng aming manual ng pag-aaral naman sa pagsasalita ng aming tribo. Ang hindi pa lang talaga nalalaman nitong aming mga kabataan yung eskwelahan. Sa ngayon po ay tuloy-tuloy pa rin yung pagtuturo dito sa barangay Uyambay. May eskwelahan kami ng IPD tungkol doon sa curriculum ng pagsasalita ng
Traditional. Okay. So what Kuya Nato said is that there is a school for IPs, so IP school where they teach IP youth on the old language of the Dumagat Remontado. Because currently it's not being spoken, it's not being used nowadays. So they have a school where some of the children can learn how to speak the old language of Dumagat Remontado. So
At yung ibang gawain namin at doon sa mga komunidad ay patuloy pa rin naman namin na pinakikita doon sa aming mga kabataan para hindi mapulawi na tuluyan yung aming mga tradisyon, lalo na sa aming mga komunidad o pamayanan na bawat barangay nitong aming komunidad, ng aming bayan ay amin pa rin ay pagpapatuloy at doon sa aming mga leader ng bawat pamayanan ay amin pa rin hindi winawala yung tradisyon ng mga IP sa aming komunidad.
So he said that in each barangay, so barangay in the Philippines is the smallest unit of administration in government. So it's like small villages. So in each barangay where they have IP leaders, so they have their own initiatives or projects, not really projects, but more of initiatives of how they can transfer some of the knowledge, traditional knowledge and practices. But yeah.
Okay.
At saka yung mga iba naming mga produkto, lalo na yung mga handicraft, ay patuloy pa rin namin sila na naipakikita at ng tuluyan na talagang hindi papulawi yung mga kabataan namin ay amin pa rin silang tinuturuan at para hindi tuluyan na mawala yung aming tradisyon.
They also teach the youth on how to make traditional handicrafts. Which binibenta niyo po ba yun?
Sa totally talaga namang talagang kami nagbebenta lalo na sa mga tourism.
Which they sell as souvenirs in the ecotourism area also.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Salamat.
Thank you.
Salamat. Yeah. So that's the answer. Many reasons why the young people things that they need to learn, and also already many initiatives that has been done, although the issue still remains about the supports from the government. Yeah, Ma'am, yeah. Maybe you can react to that before we end the session.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing. Yeah. And very interesting stories and experience. Yeah. Yeah. And all efforts, I think, need to get support from government as well as other supporting parties. Yeah. The organizations like NGOs like RMI or like Pakisama, or the community-based organization itself, like Lakwat Jawas, the youth organizations, and other parties. Yeah. So, for example, for government, actually, this is for case of Indonesia, and for the case of the Philippines, I think the Philippines, I think, is more advanced because Philippines established already the IPRA, yeah, Indigenous Peoples rights. I mean, the law on the indigenous people's right. Because of that establishment of the law on the indigenous people's rights, so it is, I think, possible for many indigenous groups in the Philippines to develop like ideas as well as actions, like shared by friends from Dumogat Remontado, yeah. But for the case of Indonesia, we still in the process of having that bill on the rights of indigenous peoples to be enacted. Yeah. However, the certain government agencies like the Ministry of Education and Culture, actually, they have been initiating, yeah, efforts also to think about giving space for the integration of the indigenous local knowledge into the education, formal education. And I think they also have been supporting the actions initiated by the NGOs in initiating like the special schools or special critical education process for indigenous peoples. But it's not yet I think in all regions. Yeah, this is still at the national level, and probably for many provinces and districts, including East Nusa Tenggara, probably the provincial office of that Ministry of Education and Culture is not yet, yeah, giving enough attention for the circulations of the indigenous local knowledge into the education, as well as the opportunity for the indigenous peoples, especially indigenous youth, yeah, to relearn the indigenous local knowledge and continue practicing it. Yeah, so that's yeah, it's a challenge. So yeah, hopefully each of us, like in our own capacity, could continue and work together and to increase, yeah, the attention of the either state actors or non-state actors to really provide support, so that our efforts to empower the indigenous youth to really recognize, yeah, the benefits of being indigenous youth could be strengthened. Yeah, and of course then also we all society would also benefit from the active participation of the indigenous youth and preserving and maintaining the indigenous local knowledge, as well as a certain dimension of the culture, yeah, of each community. But also at the same time, I think the indigenous youth will also become more critical, so that hopefully the change internally at the indigenous community would come from the indigenous youth. For example, certain indigenous communities, probably at a certain period of time in the past, they had experience of women are allowed to participate in the decision-making process in the meetings of, especially the customary meetings. But then the next period of time, probably the involvement of women became very limited, and then I think I have heard stories where indigenous youth then started to have like a critical suggestions. Yeah, okay, we would like to have a good in terms of good changes in our own community. We would like to allow the women of different ages and generations also to participate or to make any other changes. So nurturing the culture or nurturing the traditions doesn't mean that we cannot change that. I think each community is not static. So indigenous community is always dynamic, has always changed. But I think now it is the time that indigenous youth would be actively participate, yeah, in the decision making in each of the community. Yeah, and I believe in you, the indigenous youth, that you could make good changes for the in each individual of members of indigenous communities, for the community themselves, for the society as a whole, for your customary lands, the customary territories, and for the earth. Yeah. Tila, I'll give the role to you as moderator.
Yes, thank you, Mamia, for this very rich session on. Yeah, we talk maybe some heavy words on there are the words on colonialism. Well, if it is translated to local language, it must be actually not strange or alien words, but then we need to learn this kind of concept once in a while to enrich the practices that we the young people have been doing for on daily basis. So just to sum up what Mbak Mia or Ate Mia explained, not to sum up actually, I just got some reflections for myself that modernity is actually can be coexist with traditional knowledge, traditional or being indigenous can coexist with modernity. But what is important is that as what the young people has been doing is to learn their traditional knowledge, their traditions, their customs, to really understand what is the battle or what it is to be indigenous, so that they can be proud of it, and then they can use or utilize the modernity itself, such as the straw or some other handicrafts, for example, that are produced by the young people, and some other ideas coming up from what is mentioned by the friends from Molo, experimenting foods. That's experimenting. It's not only the ones coming from old era. So utilizing modernity to enrich the to strengthen the customs. As Mamia mentioned that she believes in the young people, so there are many hopes given to young people to strengthen, to be empowered, and to strengthen their community, as mentioned by friends from many places, also from Molo, that mentioned that it is to also protect the land, protect their territory, because otherwise you will not recognize if it's missing, because you don't know what is there. So that's from me. Thank you, Mamia. Thanks everyone for joining this 2-hour session. I'll give the floor back to the host, Alvina. Thank you. Maraming
Thank
salamat.
you. Maraming
Okay,
salamat.
thank you, Atila. Thank you also to Mbak Mia. We have arrived at the end of the session. I would like to convey our thanks to all of you who has been following this session. I'm sorry for any inconveniences, and I hope we all can learn many things from this session. And before we end the session, I think we will take a photo first. So if you can open your camera, please do so. And Kasupri will take the picture. Okay, so I will give the instructions. So Kasupri, are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. For everyone,
Okay.
please give your best pose. 1, 2, 3. Let's take a photo again. 1, 2, 3. Thank you for everyone. Thank you for Mbak
Thank you.
Mia.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Wahyu, for translating.
Good day.
Thank
Ella
you,
for
Wahyu.
moderating.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you
Thank you.
tomorrow. Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Mylin, for translating to Tagalog.
See you tomorrow.
Oh, thank you. Yuk, izin live ya.
Ya, Kak Butet,
Mbak
terima
Mia.
kasih
Oh
sudah
ya.
join.
Ya, Kak Tila, makasih sudah jadi moderator.
Terima
Kawan-kawan.
kasih Mbak Butet. Tadi ada Hayu ya, aku lihat sedikit ya.
Iya, iya.
Terima kasih.
Maraming selamat. Maraming selamat.
Maraming selamat.
1, 2, 3. Maraming. Maraming selamat.
1, 2, 3. Terima kasih. Terima kasih.
See you tomorrow. Sampai besok.
Yeah, sampai